Yeah.
Also the other thing
I
is
also
that,
want to say something about the Russians. Always talk about they have like 300 billion or something saved up. I just want to put this in perspective, okay? So the Russians say they have 300 billion or something put away of their oil resources. Norway has 1.1 trillion, and we are 5 million people. So that's approximately $120,000 for each Norwegian. If you take the Russian money and pull them out on the population, it's $1,800. They're at war. $1,800 is nothing. Like when people like talk about how Russia has so much money and they don't have no foreign debt, and talk about all this money, I wonder if people can like divide this up and like it's $1,800 per population, and always how much it costs to be at war. Like if you go back to, it's not really comparable, but it's a little bit comparable. If you look at Great Britain before the First World War, there was like the biggest empire ever. They had all the resources, all of everything, and the war broke them. Like, so when Russia just keep shouting about the $1,800 per inhabitant, I just like, oof, they're going in for a hard crash there, actually.
well, I mean, for them, as long as they make it about a fight for survival, it makes sense that they mentioned the 300 billion, because that is the lifeline. If that runs out, then they're pretty much insolvent. They can only say we take on more government debt over time. But the question is, if they have zero foreign currency reserves and that's all they have left, how long will people believe the Russian government can just save itself if revenues drive up? Because only rely on the resources they can sell. That's the contrast of the Russian economy to the ones of the West. We actually sell shit that people want, that we manufacture, that people make in big tech. But the advantage and disadvantage of Russia is that it's purely based on the natural resources. They don't care about taxation. I guess that's why for ordinary Russians, the sanctions really didn't matter, because it's not like Russia really has a large taxation base. It's like they have many large companies that produce things people need. It's that they really take huge amounts of money. I think it was like above 25% at least, just from all their resources. And that is like huge in contrast to any other Western country. And we rely on our companies to do things and sell shit to other people.
Man, another thing is that money, right? You need the money only to import stuff. Like if you produce the things yourself, it doesn't matter, because you can just print money and it doesn't matter. It still circulates within your own country. So I think that's the difference, because Russia don't really needs a lot of things from outside. They still import like very high tech stuff, consumer goods, but they are importing from from China, and then they have currency swap. So I suspect it doesn't affect them that much. Like, yes, I agree. I think it's the low number per capita in terms of the reserve. Yeah, it does sounds very low for a European or Western country, like even for Singapore. But the thing is, we are all importing countries. Like we import more than we export, whereas Russia don't really needs that much import. I think that's the difference. I think in terms of the economics. So which is why to them this reach, because they don't buy stuff. What do you think?
I had to look at this. I had to look at what you're saying now. Okay, so Russian grain products, they're exporting really much grain, but the seeds they're getting from Europe. That's why they have so good yields. And also had a look at the Russian fish industry. Like in Norway, we're really big on fish, and we have salmon in like these cages. Russia also have this, but we produce the fish babies. That's what we call. Like, and also the farming equipment. I was astonished about this. If the farming equipment, most of it is actually coming from Norway. So they are importing, and these are just the things I've seen since I live in Norway. I wonder about all the other
countries. They can't
countries.
do anything. They can't produce anything. I don't use any Russian product. I mean, when we had a Russian car in 1986, it was a Lada, but nobody ever thinks about to buy Russian car anymore. They don't do anything in Russia. They do a few tractors and things, but that's also their weapon industry is dying now. I think they will have a big blow because of this war, because all the countries where they were exporting now, I think they will really consider buying Russian weaponry because it's so vulnerable and it's so low tech. It's just you can't really fight only like. So anyway, what I'm saying is like I think probably Russia will be more and more dependent on China in terms of financial aid as well. And I actually wanted to ask you, like, what do you think? Um, how much could it turn on the situation now if China decides to provide stronger support to Russia in this war? What kind of support can China do at all, which can change the situation or help Russia out from this trouble?
I think regarding high tech, they can start to export more and more high tech weapon systems like drones and so on. But except for that, I think there is not too much the Chinese can really do because the microchip battle is already ongoing with the US and the West itself. The Chinese need all the microchips they can get. And regarding high tech machinery, that continues to come from Europe, which is like I think people tend to forget, like Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium. I don't know. They're kind of the places where you get most of the machines that make machines. I think even at TSMC, if I'm not mistaken, the machines that make the microchips have like a lot of parts which are made by German companies and made by
The
Dutch.
laser, the optics, and things like that.
And
The
you cannot
optics are made
replace
by
that. Chinese
Zeiss,
don't have any
and I
substitute.
think the lithography is Dutch.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think the lot is like in our discussion, it seems like the sanctions on the surface seems like it doesn't affect Russia that much, but the devils is in the details because it's always the parts, the things that you didn't know that they need, that you don't even know that you need that thing that actually kills you. Like I think the talking about the microchips is quite apt because what happened to China was that they got surprised that a lot of the small little parts that it needs for the production of the microchips, they actually got sanctioned. They realized they need it and they cannot get it, and they cannot produce. And then that's why Huawei, we don't even have Huawei phone nowadays. Like it's almost entirely gone, because they were surprised that certain sanctions, right, totally affected very specific high tech stuff that just eliminates the entire industry. And I think that may be happening to Russia.
And I think that is the advantage of the battle of the system kind of starting now, because if we would have waited 20 more years and Russia was just allowed to continue as it is, selling its resources to everyone, just building up a larger foreign currency reserve. I mean, it doesn't matter what the Russian economy is doing otherwise, they just rely on that. And China continues to build up and catch up regarding high tech and also high tech machinery. Then the West would have a much harder time of stemming the tide. But as of now, I think what we really have to keep in mind is that what we import from China, from Russia, is resources and uncomplicated manufacturing in most cases. And what China and Russia import from the West is high-tech machinery and highly digitized other products. And so if everything was cut from now, China's economy would be dead. I mean, we would suffer hugely. Our living standard would drop in half. But we would be less affected. I mean, at the end of the day, everything we import from these countries is for the raw resources, which again, the world has in other places as well to import. We could theoretically make it home, but the high-tech machinery and all the microchips that they would need, they couldn't get from anywhere else. And I think that is why it's probably advantageous if there were to ever be this confrontation, which we have now, that is happening now, not 20 years down the road.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. Back to the thing I was talking about, the oil industry, like one company has not left, that's Schlumberger, but it will shut down, and they're not able to, when this shut down, it will destroy the valve. They have to do everything again, and these companies are built up like they have a 100-year-old history, many of them. So this is all technology, and they keep it very secret. So the oil service company, you have so many companies and so many. I think it's one of the most international industries in the world, actually, because, like you said, Germany is making the pieces to drill with, and Korea is making valves, and Australia is making something, Norway is making something. So, and you put all this together to get the best product, and that's how it works. So if this falls away, Russia won't be able to produce.
That's also one of the reasons why I'm also always so surprised if from the Russian perspective, for example, they say, oh, Germany should be much more central, should be a lot more, put a lot more interest in itself, or be more isolationist, less global. And I'm always looking at this and saying, the only reason why we're living the way we are, why everything is so cheap, because it's produced in China, why we have good technology, because we can buy the stuff we don't have, is because globalization. So why the actual fuck would we leave it? Globalization is what gave us basically everything we have. No one sound in mind would suggest leaving. And that's why I'm always surprised if, for example, one of the right-wing parties in my country suggests leaving the EU. Why? It would make everything harder. The trade network we built up over ages would collapse. Our living standard would collapse. And for what?
Look at
For
Britain.
For gas, just only gas, just for gas, just for
Congratulations,
cheap
you
gas.
now have gas, but you don't have the oven to use it, nor the electricity to actually do anything with it. You now have the gas. Congratulations.
Well, if you are isolated, like probably you can maintain a lifestyle like North Korea, if you don't want to be a part of the globalization. But
exactly, you can.
It's like,
and that's what I don't understand with the Russians
importing stuff, but then you're back to 1920.
And that's what I don't understand with all the pro-Russians talking about, oh, we're making it even better now than before, and everything is fine and everything is okay. I wonder sometimes, if they say this in the military, everything is going fine, everything is according to plan, everything is just perfect, and the same with our economy, everything is just perfect, we're doing better than ever. Like I feel like there's some drugs or something. Sometimes I wonder, like, what the fuck are they talking about?
Regarding the economy, I think it's one thing that is important is that Russia they don't have a complex economy, and they don't strive to having one. If we were to do what Russia did, we would obviously be fucked because our living standards would be broken down to nothing. But Russia is not a rich country. Russia has a simple economy that relies on exporting all the basic things it has, and what they talked hugely about when discussing the sanctions, I think was The Economist who analyzed it, was about the substitution the Russians do. So when we talk about like them lacking the high-tech machinery from Western countries, is that they substitute it for something that's a lot worse, but somehow works. Like when they don't have the right engines that they get from Western companies, they take the cheap Soviet diesel engines who have been rotting by the 500s in an old factory, fix them up. They still work to get your forklift to go around. It's just that it's a lot worse. And as long as your exports don't have to be competitive, but you're just trying to maintain some sort of economic activity, this is hugely effective. But what Russia is doing right now is pretty much killing its economy to ever compete with anyone else for the next 50 years. They can survive like this for a long time, but they will never be competitive with anything.
No, I heard the Russian guy. I talked with a Russian guy, and he said, "Oh, we have all the factories because the car industry is just wiped out." And he said, "Oh, but we have all the factories." Yes, you have the factories, but you don't have the software and you don't have all the parts. All the parts are coming from all over the world, so you can't do anything with those factories.
It's not like Hamburg, right? Like you change the logo of the McDonald's to what is the new McDonald's? No. I don't know, something like.
Yeah. And they also said this about the oligarchs, like, oh, they lost because the sanctions, they lost so much money outside, and everybody said, oh, but they're fine because BP left they left a huge amount of equipment and everything. Yes, but are you happy with having a lot of oil in the ground or a lot of money in the bank? Oil in the ground is not worth anything before you do all these processes. So if you have like 100 billions in the ground in oil, you can't do anything with that.
And when we're just talking about the economic side of things, one argument I always kind of look strange at is, oh, but our economy is growing, our GDP is going up. Well, obviously, you're at war. Yeah. You're producing a lot more stuff, but a bullet If you produce 1,000 bullets, that's going to pump up your GDP, but you are not going to live better with 100,000 bullets. It's not productive GDP. It's GDP that's going to pump into war that's just gone. You produce a shell, you fire the shell, it explodes. Congratulations, your GDP went up. You burn money in an explosion, literally.
Yeah. And this problem also come into the. I also had a look at the Russian weapons industry. They've been selling a lot of weapons, especially to I recommend everybody to have a dive in this because it explains a lot. When they're selling weapons, they're selling the license. So all the weapons that are built in India or China because mostly they sell the weapon to these two. And Russia, and we're talking about artillery production, like Russia always had, like, they think they have hundreds of millions of artillery shells lying. So they have not maintained any artillery production because they think they have like this big storage. So they have 2 factories, but I don't know how much artillery they are producing. But if everybody in Russia thinks that they have 100 million artillery shells lying, why focus on production of artillery shells? That's maybe a reason on what's happening now. I don't know. And also when it comes to artillery, I just heard that they're running out of barrels, that's one of the problems they have. But at the start of the war, it was just like we had 30,000 artillery pieces lying. So if you actually think you have a huge amount of everything, then there's no need to produce it. So I don't know, maybe that's a problem they have on all fronts.
They have, I'm sure, because
like at the end of the day, Russia, even though it has resources, its economy is the size of Italy. And if Italians really tried to do a lot of dumb shit, they could. But how much can you really do with a GDP the size of Italy at the end of the day? I mean, look, even if you have legacy companies from the Soviet Union, factories standing everywhere, there's only so much money you can throw around. And Italy could probably invade Croatia. I don't know if Croatia has a similar GDP to Ukraine, and try to get something done there. But if 2/3 or 3/4, I don't know, of the world's GDP says either I'm against you or I don't care, then they will have a really hard time getting their things done. And I think that is what's catching up with Russia over time.
Yeah, if I were pro-Russian, I would say GDP doesn't matter because we produce much more on much less. But I totally agree with you. It's something we can measure.
That's also when they say, oh, we're firing 10 times as much as the Ukrainians. We can see what you achieve with that. Wouldn't it be better to say we're firing much less than the Ukrainians? Just to say we're doing the same amount of damage, but we're just firing half as many shells. Wouldn't that be better from a publicity side of things?
I read the Reibach report on how much artillery shell, because they have like to take out a machine gun position. It's like 150 rounds of artillery or something. They count this. And with a Panzerhauser 2000, you need 2 shots.
Now, yesterday was, I think, the European Union. I'm not sure which institution was that they agreed on to support Ukraine with 2 billion euro worth of shells, and they will manufacture it inside the EU. I don't know which companies will sign this contract, but that's a lot of shell. That's I think 2 million shells or something like that.
In what time frame?
They're aiming to ramp up the production to 250,000 shells in 6 months. That's what they're aiming to do.
How much are they firing though at this rate?
They're firing now probably 110,000 a month was the last estimate. But now they're saving artillery shells for an offensive. So they're just using the bare minimum of what you're getting because so Europe want to ramp up the production to 250,000 shells in 6 months. That's possible. Rheinmetall, you have Rheinmetall, you have a Czech group, you have in Spain, you have in Sweden, in Norway, you have Bulgaria, Romania. There's a lot of places that can produce artillery shells. Also the French and Australian have, and also US is ramping up to 100,000 artillery shells a month. So that
I think
in half a year they will have more artillery than Russia,
I think
or
you're
more precise
significantly
artillery anyway.
underestimating the production capabilities of Europe, because the last number I've seen was by the chief of staff of a Czech artillery shell producer, and he said Europe right now can produce 300,000 shells a month. So
they just needed the money.
So 250,000 shells in 6 months seems very low.
No, but they're ramping up production, so they're producing 250,000 every month.
Every month. Okay, okay, sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you said 250,000 in 6 months.
Yeah, I said that, but they're ramping up production, so they will produce 200,000 in 6 months. They will produce 200,000 a month.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I also got confused. So I think we are already 2 hours into. Sorry, Chacle, you continue.
Okay, one last thing. I think one of the difficulties with judging what the capabilities also actually are is that in Europe, you think like nothing gets done until the need arises. I mean, the 2 LNG terminals of Germany, if they would have been planned in peacetime, people would have said it takes at least 3 years. I mean, just all the legal documents to go through, impossible. You can't have that. So when Russia put a stop on all the gas, people were like, Germany's going to die. But of course, if you have the choice between your economy dying and there not being any gas, you're able to get 2 of these done within 8 months. And I think it's a similar thing when it comes to these processes of ramping up ammunition production. When people realize Ukraine needs 100,000, if you don't provide them, the Russians will push to Kiev. Then quite quickly you will see ammunition plants popping up everywhere, which you thought was impossible before.
That's also what we see in terms of provided aid by the US. It's always, I know you want to stop, but
no, it's okay. Carry on.
It's always, we're going to provide this piece of equipment, and then the Ukrainians fight, and the Russians make it an unequal fight because they get an advantage somewhere. So the Americans provide the next piece of equipment and the next piece of equipment and so on and so forth. And the Russians never manage to just keep it, to keep their advantage. It's always, if the Ukrainians need this stuff or they're going to lose in the next few months, give it to them, whatever. And it's always been like that, because we're not going to provide them heavy weapons. They have artillery now. We're not going to provide them Western-made battle tanks. They have that now. We're never going to provide long-range missiles. They have that now. We're never going to provide fighter jets. They have that now. We're never going to provide Western fighter jets. I think we see a trend.
Soon to come. I'm quite sure at least F-16s.
The thing is, like,
please no.
but you could save a lot of lives. For example, now if they would have like tanks at the moment, they were waiting for those fucking tanks almost a half year now. So they wouldn't need to stand in the trenches, in like water and die like hundreds every day if they would have those fucking tanks already.
I agree, absolutely. But I'm just saying it's not gonna be a.
But I think the US is afraid to win too fast, actually, because if Europe and America really wanted, they could just push in everything.
Exactly.
And I think it would be over quite fast.
Really. That's really sad.
It's the element
I ask myself,
Russia has nukes.
Sometimes I ask myself if it's like
they have to maintain this, but actually, it's interesting that we also forget to talk about the nuclear threat. And did you notice that recently we don't talk about that anymore, or just very low level?
It was ridiculous from the start.
Like,
had a hard time taking people seriously when they talked about it.
Putin also stopped threatening with that. I think they stopped considering it, or what could be the reason for that? What do you think?
I think the nuclear. I think we don't have to be afraid of the nuclear, but I fear that if Ukraine have a breakthrough now, that we may see chemical weapons. That's what I fear. That
But that's the thing.
Ukraine
Think about the Chinese though. Would the Chinese need to see such an escalation?
Yeah, but the Russian would say that it was Ukraine.
Yeah, the thing is, we don't even know.
I think the Chinese are treading carefully here. If Russia were to use tactical nukes or use like chemical weapons on more than like a very limited scale, I think that's the point where China can just cut the funding, or like tell the Russians we will cut the funding of this further, because the Chinese they need the rest of the world to continue functioning normally, at least for now. So that's why I think it would have never crossed that line. Even if the Russians were losing really badly, they would rather declare total war and or go for an armistice with Ukraine and proclaim some sort of victory at home. Say in the armistice it says all the Nazis have to be expelled or whatever. But I think they will not go to nukes.
Because I personally have this problem with NATO, is the sense that like they don't, like the West provides the help very slow. Like, that's something that I really feel very uncomfortable with. It's like, because I'm standing in the middle, I'm neutral, generally speaking. I don't really, I don't want Russia to win too easily, because that will empower China to do something with Taiwan. But I also worried that Russia will collapse, then that will cause a lot of people to die within, in their own internal conflict. But then Ukraine, but the thing is that the help that they give to Ukraine is not helping Ukraine. It's just dragging the war. That's the problem I have. Because if you have a very big force, you give them whatever they are promised up to now, within the first 3 months, you put it all in, the war cannot continue. Russia will have to, they have to rethink. But now
this is the problem of these democratic institutions. This is why we always slow in Europe, because we have these democracy breaks. What you have to go through the parliament, go through the elections and things like that. You can't just make decisions. That's why in short term we always have these issues, but long term it's always at the end that's the beneficial. I think this is why it's happening.
Yeah, I always did tell people that never underestimate the United States in terms of the ability to ramp up war production, because in World War II, the Japanese went to attack Pearl Harbor because they didn't believe that United States would be able to become what they became at the end of the World War II. So they were producing one aircraft carrier per every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Was ridiculous. They was like, what the fuck? they were aiming to destroy 4 aircraft carriers. They end up at the end of the war they had almost 100 big ones, and then they have more of the small ones. It's crazy. So that's why I did during the open mic or something, I did say that don't underestimate, because when United States really go into war production, go into total war mode, no one can beat them. And we saw it in the COVID, how they produce the vaccine. It's stupid amount of time they produce vaccines for the entire world. Like literally Pfizer can produce for literally everyone in the world. So and that's just Pfizer. If you're talking about war, it's a lot more. So it's just a matter of how this war is going to develop. That's how I think.
Yeah, that's why I'm thinking that the reason why they never let the Russians have an advantage. I think the West, and especially the US, is just trying to ease the Russian into signing an armistice. Basically, every time the Russians gain an advantage, the US just sends a weapon to negate that, and they just trying to say, look, you're not going to go anywhere. Please just stop this with an armistice. We don't want the Ukrainians to just overrun you. We don't want you to just lose your entire military, but you're not going to win this. So every time you get an advantage, we're going to stop you gaining that advantage. So please realize that this is useless and go.
Don't you still not understand?
Kind of.
No, because
I think that's what's happening. I don't know. I'm not the US president, but that kind of seems reasonable. Because
I totally
that way
agree.
the news stay in their silos and nobody.
It's the most rational.
Well, a good example for this, that during the Second World War, beside they were fighting in Europe and the Pacifics, they were also supporting Russia. Most of the Russian weaponry after like 1943 was coming from the United States. So, for example, on the Soviets were like driving like Dodge, and it was a lot different kind of, not just military equipment, but also like steam engines to pull the trains and a lot of stuff. So, yeah.
I lost my train of
Capacity
thought.
was there.
Actually, just now Sebastian was saying something that I actually have a question to talk about, but I lost it.
About stopping the.
It's about the rationality of
so they
The treaty.
slow
So
support.
they go.
the treaty. So this one is not on the agenda that I wrote because I didn't think about that. No, what do you think would be a acceptable negotiation endpoint? No, what is the treaty, like the armistice, like, because the Russians are not, like, we can see that it's not possible for them to just retreat out of Ukraine entirely and give up Crimea. It's impossible. That will collapse the entire country. You disintegrate the Russian state as it is. But what do you think is realistic expectations for this peace negotiation? Because I think the Donbas region don't really like Ukraine like at all. So that is also have something I think might have to be considered, because they are just they can't live together.
Realistically,
But that is exactly the point when you talk about the Donbas. That's where I think it's very important to differentiate between the Donbas regions that effectively seceded from Ukraine, like 2014, kind of the narrow strip across the border that at some point stabilized. That was at that point inside the Russian information bubble, and the rest that stayed in Ukraine and was effectively just governed through the entire time. And I mean, one side got the shelling of the separatists. One side saw how the separatists were also committing massacres by their militias, and the other side was shelled by Ukraine. The other side saw how Ukrainian militia units, sometimes right-wing units, of course, like the Azov Battalion, was committing atrocities. And so both, I think, pretty much at that contact line is where you enter a different world. Like I think if you ask people who lived on the Ukrainian side for the past 6 years, I mean, especially a city like Mariupol that was shelled by the separatists constantly. They had like one time when they used rocket artillery to shoot missiles at the entire city, and then a bunch of children died, and they drew the children's on the walls as like a sign of protest against it or something. I think that contact line is one point where it would be the most reasonable to draw the line before. But that, I think, is just something that Russia would never agree to. And since, again, the West is not providing the weapons Ukraine actually needs to liberate its formal territory, I think an armistice at any point in time is really the most reasonable thing we can go to, because retaking Crimea would take vast amounts of lives, of equipment, and you would face the danger of Russia collapsing, which is not in the interest of the West. And going beyond the old contact line is something that also, I think, a lot of people in European governments as advisors to the secret services would advise against, because fighting in a city like Donetsk, where the population doesn't want you, is not something that feels like liberation anymore. And that's why my opinion is any peace deal until the old contact line is what will be the most reasonable thing to do.
So it's from the current line to between the current line and the 2014 line.
Yeah, but it's easy to say, or like, okay, let them keep the occupied territories, and worst case scenario, best case scenario, depends who you ask. Make it like a election, how they call it, referendum again, like where the population wants to belong. But on the other side, I'm not sure that, for example, the Baltic states would really like these solutions, like Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, even Poland, who has like Russian minorities, and like 40% in Latvia, I think, because it would mean to them, like if the international community will approve this, it would mean to them that it could enforce or or like encourage the Russians lives in those states to ask the same rights, and they don't want that. And I think everybody who is supporting Ukraine now will have a chair at the table, should have a chair, I think, at the table, or a word on this, like what they think about what would be the best. This is what I think. This is what probably the diplomacy will do.
If I can make a real fantasy kind of deal, I'd say probably give back Ukraine all of the territory except Crimea, but with international peacekeepers basically going through the nets and asking every person, do you want to be in Ukraine? Do you want to be in Russia? And if they say you want to be in Russia, then that's acceptable. They get all of their possessions they can't move. Basically, if they own houses, land or something, that's bought at a reasonable price, maybe even much above market price. So they have the cash to start a new life. To just have a kind of population exchange like we had after World War II, where a lot of countries just exchanged minorities so that regional problems and tensions can cool down. And so that way, everyone can say they won, because the Russians can say we saved the Russian population and minorities because they're now Russian. And Ukraine can say we won because we liberated all of the territories. And the Russians, and no one can say, yeah, but Russians won because they grabbed land, because, well, they didn't. But they can still sell this as a win because everyone kind of gets what they say they want at the very least. But it's never going to happen.
Yeah,
I believe,
because especially,
like I said, a fantasy deal. But
Yes.
I would like to see this.
yeah,
I
because
believe,
even the
that-
referendum can be done as well, because the like the people who are pro-Ukraine have all moved to the Ukrainian side. Yeah, so even the referendums
Exactly.
will not be fair, and nobody will recognize it. Like, for example, the referendum done on the Ukrainian controlled side, the Russians will not believe it, because who knows, the Ukrainians could drive a lot of population in to boost up the numbers. Who knows, man? The Russians could do exactly the same thing. And then it's like, yeah, it's a bit depressing to think of it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Morten.
I think that's
I believe
some sort of
that
armistice that
2014 lines would the 2014 lines would be a good start for the negotiations. But I actually believe it's easy to take Crimea. If they reach the Azov Sea, they can easily cut electricity. They can take out the Crimean bridge. They can cut the water. They can really lay a siege if they want to. But yeah, I think
that's to reach the border.
We can start having a negotiation. What? Sorry.
I think the actual taking of Crimea, though, is where you reach the point where people will be like, what's the point of this? I mean, the Ukrainians, and this is what the West thought would be as well, the contact line of the 24th of February was how the Ukrainians lived for 8 years now. And the populations in Crimea and the part of the Donbass which are occupied are don't have access to any Ukrainian information for the past 8 years. They have only been watching Russian state TV. They probably have some Telegram groups, perhaps some family on the other side. But from the Ukrainians I've met who have friends who live in Russia, it's usually a thing that they live in parallel universes. And most people on Crimea, I deeply think, would not want to be part of Ukraine. So this kind of idea that you say, well, we want to fight for the self-determination of Ukraine and for the right of defending yourself, I think it doesn't end necessarily at the contact line of the 24th of February, but that's where you get the most reasonable ending. Because beyond that, you turn to a point where you're like, well, because the Russians attacked us, we now get to reignite the conflict of 2014 and say that we want everything back that, you know, by international law is ours. But at that point, you're also just fighting over a population that clearly in its majority does not want to be part of your country.
Yeah, but I think it's much more than just population. The population. This is a country we're talking about. The population is gone in 100 years. So like this is a country. So before 2014, Ukraine was never happy with any agreement that was signed then. That they always wanted to have their whole country back. you can always move the population if that's necessary. A lot of the people who live in Crimea now have been moved in from Russia, actually, living in houses that that a lot of pro-Ukrainian people that used to live in Crimea have moved to Ukraine. Like this Ben Davidov, I think he was born in Sebastopol or something. So they really want this back, and I don't see that we should decide for them. I think it's up to them how much they are.
We certainly can, which is why I think it makes sense that you have a maximalist position for the Ukrainian side, because it is a thing that Russia has just been over time taking more and more territory, and it's rightfully not the one for itself.
Yeah.
But if you want a rational point from which a ceasefire agreement could last, I think taking back Crimea, taking back all of Donbass, you reach a point where Russia, I think, where
basically lost the war.
People will either go nuts and go all-out war if they still can, or Russia itself will collapse. And at some point, you have to think, well, what is the point of it?
The problem is you can't have Russia officially lose the war, because at that point they're going to elect a revanchist leader who's just going to nuke the country.
We'll need a second Marshall Plan.
You need a solution where everybody wins, and that's the problem. Everyone has to be able to sell the victory.
But do you really think that the Western analysts didn't play all these games and I mean all these opportunities already? I don't think that they're really afraid of Russia losing and Russia disintegrating. I think they're already working on those kind of scenarios as well. Like they go to visit those countries, in the Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and so on, trying to stabilize at least those areas. So I think I wouldn't exclude these options as well, that Ukraine can take back everything. Also because I think one other thing that they need to consider, like how will Ukraine survive economically in the future. So the Donbass and both the Crimea is a very important region for them economically, and not sure that they can afford to lose it, because now they will have a huge, how should I say, a very hard time to stand up. Their whole the country is destroyed. Half of the country, 30% of the country is destroyed. So it's also an interest for Europe to have like the stability. Like Ukraine will not have changed his mind like after the peace agreement and start to fight for the Donbass again, right?
Yeah, I had a look at this economic perspective. Ukraine actually have as much gas as Norway does. 1 trillion cubic meters of gas in the northern parties and the eastern parties of the country. And this is not explored in anything. So if you get a good oil company in there, they can really have, they have a lot of resources actually that are untapped. But because of the corruption and everything, they have not been able to do anything with it. They also have a lot of oil resources outside Crimea. So
yeah, and also they need to make Ukraine happy as well, not just Russia, because Ukraine will be like armed from up top to the toe now, and they will prepare also the neighboring countries, Poland and everybody around that. They are arming themselves like heavily. So I think they would like to settle down the temperature over there. Then they have to make sure that Ukraine is really happy with the results of that too.
I think that's the issue really, because most solutions would end in a frozen conflict. We could, unless we say either one side gets a total victory, you will end up with a ceasefire that nobody is truly happy with. Like if Ukraine doesn't take Crimea and all of the Donbass, which it formerly owned, the Ukrainians will always say, well, this is still illegitimately Russian, and there could definitely be a faction within the Ukrainian leadership who thinks we should continue fighting. While
nationalists again.
But how would you go around? I mean, with a reasonable result that doesn't end in either Russian collapse or Russia completely. I don't know. It's really a hot card from there on out. I mean, really mad.
I think it's impossible. You can't please everyone. So someone has to lose in this game, I think.
Yeah.
Because I think if Russia were to retreat from the entire of Donbass, it will be seen as a don't talk about Crimea, just they retreat out of entire of Donbass. I think it will be seen as a massive defeat within Russia itself, and then Putin is probably going to lose power, and we do not know who is going to be next, and that's one thing that is quite scary. I think if you look at the United States perspective, they don't mind Russia collapsing and disintegrating, but I'm not sure if Europe wants that. United States definitely, as they will be very happy. Russia collapsing into 100 countries, they will be very, very happy. But
I think there will be.
If Russia has nukes, nobody wants it. If Russia didn't have nukes, I think that wouldn't be a big issue. But because of the nuclear arsenal, that's really the one thing where everyone. I mean, already when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a very big issue, and I mean, people wrote books about how they have been in the room with the U.S. president when they were talking about a Russian collapse, and then they had to extend credit to the Russian government so that it doesn't default, because they really didn't want Russia to break up. And I think the strategic interest is the same. Russia can be beaten down, but it is not allowed to collapse. No, it's in nobody's interest, and I think long term as well, there is the hope that at some point Russian society will live in a somewhat more pluralist country, and it could be part of the West like any other country as well. It kind of seems off now that we're 1 year into this war, but I mean, otherwise the only thing that is keeping Russia from being integrated into Europe like any other country is its system. Otherwise, we need the resources, they need our technology. We would be a perfect fit. It's just what's keeping them from integrating is the authoritarian system and the newly found imperialist style of foreign policy of saying, I have interest in these territories and I want to take them.
Yeah, but I even think that it would be a huge blow for the Russian population, even if they take even if they manage to go down to the Azov Sea now, because everybody in Russia thinks this war is going. Yes, everything is going as planned. So it will be a huge shock for the Russian population if they lose more land now.
If they would know, maybe just let's not tell them, right? Maybe they will just redraw the maps and everything will be okay that way. Or the other option that if they cannot perform good enough, the Russian military should consider to start like modern weaponry to them as well, like so they can fight back for the Ukrainians if they would push too hard.
Yes.
All right. If we have,
I have to leave now. I have to leave now.
Okay. So it's about almost 2 hours 30 minutes. No. So do you like to have some closing statements? No, before we close this panel. Morten need to go first. Morten should start first.
Okay. I'd just like to thank everyone for the debate and really good talking to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chacles?
Thanks.
Any final statements?
Final statements. It was very nice to have this panel. Thanks to you, Weird. I think we should also try to not always have just one of us on the open mic. I think if there were two who would then, kind of also know how to have a proper argument with the other side. In future, the open mic is more sorted. Because otherwise, it just turns into absolute chaos where you have 7 people hitting on one guy with different arguments. And it's a hard time having it structured. But no, it was great. And I mean, even now that we have this panel, I think we should all still try as hard as we can to engage with the other side and have the conversation.
Yeah, I think because they don't really understand the pro-Ukrainian perspective, which is why I know this panel is very important. Like for me, it is nothing like the NAFOs on Twitter. Like the discussion here makes a lot of sense. Of course, there is certain level of like, what are the facts? Maybe slightly different, but generally we are all talking on very logical things, which I'm really happy. Like even with among you 4 guys, there are still differences in opinions, and I think it just shows that we are all normal people. It's not like the other side is crazy. Although sometimes I know some of the pro-Russians are crazy also. Sebastian, the final statement.
As my final statement, I'd like to ask you something. because I know that the comments under this video are going to be an absolute mess.
Yeah, you'll be crazy, man.
Can
I'm
you
going to
put
lose a few
poll,
subscribers at least.
something
Who's gonna get the
under
most shit
video
out of us?
with our names and
I guess
just
Morten.
say, who do you think is the craziest? I'm really interested because who
is the
do
craziest
Russians
among you
think
four?
is the craziest of us? Yes.
Or of the four?
Like a poll.
So you guys comment below. You know, who do you think is the craziest here? No.
Biggest lunatic.
We're not crazy.
Because I'm really interested what they're going to call us. It's going to be insane.
Oh, no.
I think people will be very surprised by the entire panel, the conversation. I think it's a lot more sane than people would imagine. Like even in the open mic lounge, our private chat group, people they are like so excited. They are like, oh, this is going to be a great show. They are waiting to see some NAFO level kind of nonsense. But it's not. I think I think the conversation is extremely sensible and rational and high level. In fact, I feel that I'm very happy. You see, I have nothing much to disagree about, to be honest.
Yeah.
Oh, Karl.
Also, I was also very respecting those the guys from the open mic or the pro-Russians. I think they have a very deep and very detailed knowledge about what's going on. That's why I'm sometimes surprised, like, why are they pro-Russian? Because if you strip down all these things at the end, I think it's very simple. Like, like who to really who has the right in this conflict, I think. And if you are a humanist. And I also wanted to ask if you could comment, if this conversation changed their view a little bit, at least, or considering some of the points what we touched here, that would be interesting to know. Or it was more relaxing, or it was okay to watch it, or it was very annoying to see this.
Yeah. So you comment,
hate
you
us.
viewers, comment below. Know what you think. I personally, I think that a lot of the neutrals the pro-Russians are still going to be pro-Russians, but the neutrals are going to appreciate this conversation a lot. Because there is a lot of talking points, a lot of things that I also don't know. I also did not know. So I also learned. So is I think it's brilliant to keep the mind balance, especially for the neutrals, which I believe that a majority of my viewers actually are. It's just that they are leaning Russian because my personal experience is that a lot of the pro-Ukrainians are crazy, they're literally crazy on Twitter. They're just so irritating, and that turns a lot of the neutral off, and because they are always just doing cheerleading, and the neutrals, we are just trying to understand what's happening, trying to analyze, and all this noise, right? It just turns people towards the Russian side, and I did tell the NAFO's people on Twitter as well. It's like, come on, man, they are not going to convince anyone. You're not going to convert anyone into the pro-Ukrainian side by doing this. But they don't understand, because the information war is on. So it's just how it is. Which is why this panel, is something that I already talked about like this. Like, I think during the open mic I did mention before, I did want to do the pro-Ukrainian panel because it is going to be a very different kind of universe. Like where if I only do the open mic or the pro-Russian people, it's a totally different kind of perspective. We wouldn't have some of the conversations that we have today because they are so adamant that the Russians are going to win, or it's there's no universe that the Ukrainians can win, or the Russian economy is perfect. Personally, I do not know any of this. I assume based on what the frontline changes, I assume that the Russians are somewhat winning at this moment, and then when they lose, it's usually there was real reasons why they lose. For example, the withdrawals of all the main forces that cause huge gaps in the defenses. They don't have a second line of defense, all this kind of thing. So, but my point of view is very neutral. So which is why I appreciate you guys coming on. Unfortunately, we didn't have William because he's American. Yeah, no. So he has to work at this time. Yeah, maybe we're gonna have another session of this for sure. I think.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll have more pro-Ukrainian guys coming on the open mic, because I want the balance. I don't really like you guys coming on one person and then getting grilled. But it's an open mic. I don't interfere. But
Yeah, or
So,
ask
no-
them that they can vote. Like, who would they see with on the open mic session? You know, who would they like to push down
Yeah.
or mock the
Comment,
most?
viewers, if you like, any of them, put a comment, tell them that, please come on to the open mic more often. Yeah, I mean, only when they comment that we actually will know this kind of thing. Hopefully, people actually watch until this point, because that after the first 1 hour, it's like, fuck, man, this, and then you stop watching. So
Okay,
that could happen.
I hope you will have more subscribers than unsubscribers.
I'm 100% gonna lose subscribers on this panel, like, for sure.
Oh,
I'm
no.
curious.
Trust me.
At least
I'm
you
gonna
get
lose subscribers.
I think you'll get more
Maybe
views
it's a-
for this, because the title is already going to be provoking from
Oh
it.
yeah.
That's true.
More
If you see
views,
a
but no more
Pro-Ukrainian
more
panel, people are gonna be
unsubscribing.
like, what?
It may be a bit
But
late
I-
to ask this, but are we allowed to swear?
Yeah,
Or
no problem.
is
Little
this
bit
really
can.
bad for monetization or something?
If we are not swearing across the entire video, it's okay. Little bit of swearing, it's all right.
Okay.
Because tested before, so I know open mic, some of them just cannot stop swearing. Some of them.
Maybe
So-
I should have asked this at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean,
Now that I think
swearing
about
will
it.
make it more fun, right? But yeah, too much it actually can demonetize. Yeah, so thank you everyone for participating in this open mic. I'm very, very appreciative. I was worried that I cannot pull this off, because it is quite challenging to be a pro-Ukrainian in the DPA community, because you guys are the minority, and you need to be really, really brave to come on, and then later the comments will all go crazy on you guys. But I think it's important. It's really important to have the balance of view, because that's what DPA is all about. Because I don't cover both sides for no reason, because that is only when you know what is the truth. It's only when you look at both sides, then you know that the truth must be somewhere in the middle. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you for spending the time. And hopefully, I think next time we'll do it on Saturday or something, so that William can come on, and hopefully this will attract more people, more pro-Ukrainians, or at least more lean Western viewers to come on to talk, so that we can expand this panel and have different kind of people to come on and talk on a pro-West, pro-NATO, or pro-Ukraine perspective. So so thank you,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Thanks.
Have a good
And
night,
bye.
guys. Thank
See
you.
you guys.
Bye bye.
See you, guys.